Well, I guess then we have everyone from the last session, and I will just start with a short summary of the summary that we had the last time. So during last session, I presented a rather disconnected summary of David's essay, Fetishism and Social Creativity. And then we had a rather lively discussion about it. Today, I would like to make a short summary of that and then touch up on themes that we haven't explored very well last time. And after that, I will try to draw some connections between these and other David's works. So, this essay is an attempt by David to apply a method of anthropology to the problems of social creativity that has been haunting social sciences for a long time. David identifies two such problems. The first one is a tendency of any social theory is to endlessly bounce between holistic and individualistic models. The second one is a tendency of Marxian tradition is to reduce all social creativity to two modes: social reproduction, when no creativity is happening, and revolution, when everything is new. David wants to look at these problems through the practice of fetishism. So, the term fetish have entered European debate in around 1700, when Portuguese merchants used this name to describe the spiritual practice of African people, with whom these merchants were engaged in the relationships of exchange, the now famous exchange of European junk for African gold. The mere willingness of Africans to exchange what they knew is a valuable commodity, gold, for something that Europeans knew is not valuable at all, beads and junk, was taken as proof of a primitive and arbitrary nature of Africans and their fetishistic minds. About 200 years later, Marx used the term fetish to describe a certain Western habit. And then the term became so overloaded with meaning that social sciences decided to abandon it entirely until recently. Well, that's been basically a way to reduce one's opponent to say that, well, you're a fetishist as if you're arbitrary, as if you've been like stupid African. And going this way, fetishism basically become unusable in academia until it was revived by new breed of academics. So, for his purpose, David reviews early literature on fetishes and complements it with more recent data that to show that Europeans saw as what Europeans saw as a product of primitive mind was little different from social contracts when looked from the point of African counterparts. It is a threat of similarity, the threat of realization that the fear and piety with which Africans treated their fetishes is almost the same as a fear of God which ordered lives of Europeans themselves, that required most radical rejection in the form of denouncing of African ways of organizing social relationships as primitive and arbitrary. This denunciation informed how social sciences have treated fetishism ever since. In a general sense, fetishism is seen as human practice when we create things, and then, because we don't understand how we did it, we end up treating our creations as if they had power over us. We fall down and worship that which we ourselves have made. In more specific, Marxian sense, fetishism refers to the habit of treating objects one can buy on a market as possessing some kind of subjectivity of their own, capable of judging us, making us proud or indignant or angry, or enter into human relationship in all sorts of ways. Marx thought that objects from the market acquire this ability because of their production is hidden, because we collectively create these objects, but individually we don't understand how we've done so. And because fetishism can be used to justify exploitation, Marx prescribed knowledge as a cure from it. It is this attitude of contempt with which Marx looks at fetishism that David identifies as a reason for reducing all social creativity to reproduction and revolution. David's own research reveals that in the moment of creation of the fetish, people are very much aware of what they are doing, and the acts of worship they direct towards newly created fetishes are completely conscious. The decision to treat an illusion as reality because it symbolizes the shared commitment to the newly created social institution. When one pretends that some social institution exists, one is necessarily mistaken, because if it did exist, there wouldn't be a need to pretend. But by pretending and by encouraging others to pretend as well, one can bring new social relationship into being. Insofar as social creativity creates something new, it will necessarily be surrounded by air of fraud, pretense, and improvisation. And as far as it does, we can conclude that people are aware of their creation. It is only when this atmosphere of playful acting is replaced by absolute assurance that God is real, when magic of social creativity is replaced by theology, this is when we find ourselves haunted by specters of revolution. So this was basically my summary of what we've been talking last time. The topic that we didn't have time to explore, or I chose not to explore last time, but Christian correctly challenged me on that point by attracting attention to the statement that humans intentionally reproduce society. And the whole logic of fetishism seems to be describing the process of how people reproduce society, not intentionally, how origin of social contract becomes hidden. So why then David keeps saying that we wake up every day and produce our world anew? This relates precisely to the part of this essay where we didn't counter last time. Euphemisation of violence by Europeans and the opposite movement by Africans. David brings to our attention the fact that Europeans and African cultures share conception of human condition as one of suffering. In Africa, David looks at two communities, Tiv and Bakongo, which are located close to the place where European merchants were conducting their trade. And we know a lot about objects which European merchants of 17th century would have called fetishes. Most of these objects are enmeshed in a logic of affliction. Their power is seen as ability to cause human suffering through illness. One comes in contact with such object by breaking a taboo. One becomes ill, one searches for a cure, and by doing actions which placate the spirit, cure the illness, one becomes a part of a congregation of the former victims who have collective power to direct the fetish to cause suffering to others. So suffering leads to knowledge, knowledge leads to power. The logic of affliction. The power in these communities is seen as a material, fatty, yellow substance that grows on top of human heart and enables one to use his charisma to manipulate networks of debt and arrange social relationships for his benefit. This power can be enhanced by consuming human flesh, which makes man a witch, and most of local politics consists of persuading hidden witches in the community to abandon their wicked craft. Should witches persist, they would eventually be unmasked during a witch hunting purge and, well, somehow eliminated. In this way, the social power that ordinarily brings peace to the community is at the same time seen as a source of all evil. and one who accumulates too much of it is automatically comes under suspicion. In European tradition, this suffering is seen as a result of corrupt nature of human, and therefore we must have something that will constrain our selfish impulses. We must believe that God is real, is just, that incorruptible agent exists. Either as a state that embodies a divine reason or something else. And when this agent does violence to us, we are conditioned to avoid attracting an unnecessary attention to it. We are endlessly euphemizing it as lesser evil or minor inconvenience. David's claim here is that owing to their general distrust of any social power, Africans are constantly subverting the very mechanisms that turns fetishes into gods by exaggregating the violence they do and the suffering they cause. The cosmological basis for this is a lack of belief that competition for resources is a source of all human suffering, that God must necessarily be just. David also shows the spectrum within African communities themselves. The one which are fiercely egalitarian, like Tiv, are also the ones which feature most autonomous fetishes and most wicked witches. In places like Bakongo and Imirina, where David have done his own field work, the social power gets as social power gets more accepted, the power of fetishes becomes more benevolent, and violence of the witches becomes euphemized as more and more spiritual. So here we are. Here is how we end up with gods and states and all other superhuman entities which we collectively have imagined, but we insist that we must think as if they didn't have an origin, that it isn't us who invented it, but they actually, like the nature or truth or God or something else does really exist and orders us around, and all failures of human politics somehow stem from our incorrect practice of placating of these entities. So this, I guess, summarizes the entirety of this essay. And before I will go on a tangent to draw parallels with bullshit jobs, anyone wants to ask questions? Go for it.
So I'm sorry, I'm just like a student now, but can you again summarize the difference between the ideas of human nature that Europeans were carrying and the Africans? So you basically, in European idea, you refer only to gobs, yeah? Just this idea.
David draws a line of inheritance from Augustine through Hobbes to Adam Smith to later political economists and to 20th century. The origin of Augustine can be disputed, but it is what we have. It is 3rd century or BC. So Augustine transforms previous Christian tradition by saying that, well, we are cursed with insatiable desires as a punishment for original sin, and that the scene is inside us. For Hobbes, or for Augustine, it's like his revelation moment is when he stole an apple that he didn't want to eat, and then he was thinking about it, like, why did I do it? Why did I? It must be in my nature to break the law, to steal someone's apple, even if I don't want to eat it. I just want to steal it, right? And he expands it bigger and bigger. So in the end, he basically formulates our economic problem, the basic economic problem that our economy is trying to solve, is one of competition between our insatiable desires and finite world, right? We will necessarily be in competition. And this is presumably a God's way of teaching us a value of obedience. We are punished for disobedience, and we are given insatiable desires which would destroy us unless we create something that we will obey, that unless we learn the value of obedience, right? Hobbes removes God from this, but keeps the basic structure, saying, well, it is just our nature to be in competition for resources. God had nothing to do with it, but we still kind of going to kill each other unless we create a state and start worshiping it. And Smith brings God back into the picture, somehow sneaks it past, and then we get to accept basic movement of like economics that govern our politics, accepts the basic economic dilemma that we are selfish creatures, we are driven by insatiable desires in a world of finite resources, and therefore the job of economics is to distribute these resources in a way that we wouldn't kill each other. So that means that whatever power that governs us, that constrains our selfish impulses, must not be over human nature, because all our human nature is corrupted, right? And the agent that brings peace must be seen in the spirit of optimism. We must believe that it is possible for agent to exist which is incorruptible. Be that a man who, through power of reason, rises above his bodily passion. Be that state that embodies the reason which is divine. Be that something that, in a way, it must stand above, outside of society, to constrain society, to create rules. Right? Africans do not share this view of human nature, like of all human suffering being caused by corrupt human nature. And they come to conclusions that Europeans resent very much, that maybe God isn't just, maybe there is no way, like they pessimist in this sense, right? They accept the possibility that state is a violent institution that doesn't do any good, and we must accept it. So they harbor a distrust to any system that claims to create peace by doing violence to people who break social order, and they resist the movement of euphemizing and rising elevating this power into something superhuman. Patricia?
I just wanted to thank you firstly for that explanation. And I hope I'm not taking the conversation away from your explanation about God. But I just wanted to give you a citing of the page 31, and I have this book, right? Towards an anthropology theory.
The bigger one, yeah.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because I think you might have given us an explanation about the higher cost of fetish. I can't say the word, but you know what I mean.
Fetishism, yes. Yeah.
Isn't it amazing we all speak, how do you say this, about this book in a different way, right? But the one thing is that I keep thinking is that David wrote that even if, even without capitalism, there is this commoditization, right? Any object becomes a commodity when one thinks, and I'm quoting here, of it primarily as something one could acquire in exchange for something else, or that one could be willing to give up in order to get something one desires. And I keep thinking about that. It's about the power that we give our wants and needs, and then somehow that hooks us, like a fish to the worm, and that I think has some significance in this whole vision of structureless. Somehow I want to think about that more. I want to think about the hook that keeps us attached to this wanting, and so then I somehow thought, okay, I have it, I got it. Okay, we're like in this situation, we're putting it all value out there. Even if we don't have a structure, we're still putting value. And I think that what you were explaining about Africa was important to me, because it also is about what we're putting value towards, the object. It's in the somehow there is something there around the object that we're wanting more of. And so like
exactly the correct observation, yes.
Yes, it is about that, right? About it. And I keep on thinking about that. And then he talks about in page 74 and 75, he goes more into this sort of like, even if we didn't have capitalism, I think that's what he's saying, that it's about the value and the actor, the actor, looking at some kind of distinctiveness, right? That in that actor, yeah. So I'm wondering if you can just put some highlights behind that, and if I'm asking the question
a little
okay,
I will connect it.
Yeah, I just want to connect. For you. Thank you so much.
So what happens is on organizational situation here, what we're doing here. My biggest insight comes from this very book that you're reading. But two previous attempts that we had on making a group about this book basically failed and audience dissipated. Because the book is very dense, it is very academical, and I decided to start this group by plucking strings from this book and exploring different topics isolated from it, to make it, to eventually move on and to look in the book, in all of the book, right? So what you are looking at, you like the structure and the value. Like for David, value is inseparable from structure, and what it means, right? So what is a structure? This is we are going into the book. It is outside of this chapter. The structure of human relation. What is a social institution for David? Social institution is when humans repeat certain actions in roughly the same way, and these actions are structured in some sense. The value is that which persuades people to repeat the same actions. The value is the essence of institution. So when we got hooked, as you say, someone makes an action, and other people got hooked and start repeat the action, emulate, like not repeat, emulate the action, because they think this embodies a value of society. This is the proper way of behaving in a society where I want to live. Therefore, I would emulate what this person is doing, and the other person starts emulating, and so on and so on and so on. This chain of people emulating actions of each other form the institution. And then you have another institution and another institution. David tries to unpack the chains of actions which loop onto each other and maintain what we perceive as social institutions. And for him, value is that which, well, yeah, I'm starting to repeat myself. Value is the essence of institution. Value is that which persuades us to emulate actions of others. And fetishism here is a subjective experience, how it looks from inside the head of a person who starts simulating an action because he feels some kind of association, almost emotional or supernatural attachment to an object that symbolizes a behavior.
And that's why he justifies that the networks are open-ended. That if we, somewhere around there, he starts talking about, in the same chapter, after a couple of pages, he starts talking about how it's all these networks are open-ended. Is that where it allows us to imagine differently? Is that what's happening here? I don't mind to, I'm sorry.
This is this chapter that talks about why open-endedness is important. So when what I just said, right? When one pretends that social institution exists, one is necessarily mistaken. The experience of mistakenness is how modern social science treats fetishism or magic. It treats it as a mistaken belief that one can affect the world through invisible means. What David says is that when you act as if social institution exists, pretend, you are necessarily mistaken. This is where illusion of fetishism comes in. But it is also not a mistake because through this very action, you actually bring the social institution into being. If you succeed in persuading others to emulate your behavior, then the result is that the social institution that didn't exist becomes existing. So the structure, the fetishism is a necessary part of gradual change of society. When you when you pretend that something doesn't exist, that doesn't, and then other people start pretending with you, and then social institution actually does come into being. Does it clear it up? You're muted, but from your gesture, I understand that you're fine. Gerald.
Patricia, that was a great question, and Stas, that was a really interesting introduction and recap of what we were talking about last time. Just to recap, maybe one perspective is that what an economist might call demand, an anthropologist might call fetish, because fetish is broader than simply goods and services. It's a sense of belonging, it's institutions, it's identity. And although now that the word fetish might be a bit taboo, because it's maybe oversimplifying, perhaps now the word value might be the closest synonym to fetish. And that value is what places us as part of social structures or institutions. I don't know if that's an appropriate, I just kind of wanted to jump in there and ask if that might be an appropriate sort of summary of this point that we've reached at this
Okay,
point.
I understand. Connection between fetishism and economics, right? So this group is conspicuously named Fetishism and Value, for the very reason that David shows how what we call values like family values, the national values, whatever, is a general is the same as fetishism, right? The fetishism is a name for practice of creation of the values, which Europeans, when looked from the position of European merchant who has nothing but contempt to social relationships of his African counterparts, he erases all the social implication and looks at for him it becomes fetishism, right? What we in a social science call fetishism is what on other side looks as creation of the values. And then when it gets to economy operates on distinction between value, economic value, and values. The distinction is that which I hope to look deeper into one of the next sessions. Generally speaking, economic value is no different from other values in the sense that it is the same move when symbol of the value, the banner, becomes a source of the value, courageous behavior. Same as economics, the symbol of the labor becomes a source of the labor. You can persuade people to work by promising them to give money, which mean nothing except the symbol of labor. But the specific difference is that economics stands on elevating economic value above all other values. Economic value becomes a way of comparing all the other values to each other, and no other value must be used uh, uh, as a basis of comparison for other values. No other value must be seen as breakable and reconstitutable. So one example that David gives in a Theory of Value book is that we encouraged to see to have this experience of almost teleporting into other universe when we step out of our household. The threshold of our household is almost a magical portal. Inside is governed by domain of values, and if you bring economic value in if you try to bring economic value in household, if you try to promise money to your wife for sex or something like that, right? It feels outrageous. But like you're supposed to do it relating, appealing to benevolence of your of other people, trying to get into their hand, understand their intentions, and so on. But when you step outside of your house, if you go on a bus or on a supermarket and attempt to appeal to benevolence of the provider, it would be seen as similarly outrageous. Outside of household, you must conduct all human relationships through economic value, right? The stronger this this ability of your household door to isolate these two domains from each other is what gives this overarching power to economic value, and what makes fetishism of economy, like what almost elevates economy into godhood, is that constitutive moment of this economic value must not be questioned. We must just accept it.
Is your use of the word household, I mean, the word house is oikos, which is the root of economies in Greek. So it seems kind of, is that intentional that you're kind of bringing
No, it's a
the
different
word
tradition.
household? Okay.
No, it's a different tradition. I pick a terminology from David, and I mix and match it here because I necessarily draw quotes out of context. For that context, he was critiquing the political economy. And in political economy, household is this economical activity that where social relationships get reproduced, where household labor is performed of producing human beings.
And is that ability to define the boundaries of the household the nature of this power dynamic?
Um, it, it is an example that David gives to explain the concept. There are multiple boundaries folded into each other. You can have multiple levels inside household. You can have households composing like isolated groups, cities, and nations, and so. So there is a ranking to the systems of value, and the way you transcend from one rank to another usually implies some kind of something that as a power. We perceive ability to break these boundaries and transform one value into another in a situation when they must not be transformed, as Africans would call it a strong heart. That fatty substance that grows in your heart and gives you power to transform food into wives, transform something that must not be transformable into other kind of value. So you create isolation between levels of exchange, and then people who, through their charisma and ability to manipulate social relationships, find a way to transform one into another, are seen as like natural leadership types.
Maybe we could go back to this idea of a pretend process that allows the creation of fetish or yeah, the fetishization comes into being through a process of pretend that you were mentioning earlier. I think maybe that's one topic. Maybe Patricia wants to stay here for a little bit.
I do want to stay there too, because something about this whole thing about pretending also somehow it's symbolizing how much pain can we endure, right? Like from this pretending. So like if my level of tolerance is higher, if I repeat certain bad habits because I really want to be in the middle class or upper class, or I really want this possession. I think that fetishism has something to do with how much oppression do I tolerate.
Sacralization of suffering. Yes. All right. So
okay, I'm gonna mute now.
Yeah, I will try to spring from this. Thank you, and then maybe oh, John, come on in. Let's collect all the questions.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Stas. So I guess I have like a comment and a question that's sort of related to what we're discussing now. So the comment is sort of connecting this to a concept that Roy Baskar has, which is the four-planar social being. So he says that like our social being is four simultaneous things. One is our embodied personality. One is our relationship with other people. One is our relationship with nature. And then the fourth one is social structure. And like he says that like the social structure one is like the discourse of economics, and it's sort of that's this is at least my interpretation. That's like sort of what's fetishized, and people, you know, when they talk about policy and things like that, they're like, oh, economically, like politically, like we need to adjust to all these institutions, but it ignores the remaining three parts, which is where I see like like where like the actual like value of like being human and living life exists. And so that was just a comment, and then like to sort of bridge it and to ask a question of what you might think, Stas and everybody else, is that I remember David mentioned a lot that all economies are really human economies. And I wonder if that's sort of what he's getting at. Like maybe the concept of economy itself has sort of been colonized and has been like turned into this thing that like, okay, Wall Street can manage it for everybody, but like ultimately, like it's a human economy that, you know, we were talking about the household. I think it crosses the boundary of the household. It's really about like because like all of the tokens of money, etc., and marketplaces, ultimately underneath all of that is human beings in communities, you know, doing all that stuff. They're the ones experiencing pleasure. They're the ones enjoying life. The actual money or anything is not actually doesn't have agency or is not doing anything really. So yeah, those are my two comments.
Okay, so these are actually two different directions to go. John, I would put your question on the background because it is outside of this essay and goes back to very convoluted argument in the theory of value, but I will try to get back to it. The first one about that Patricia and Gerald asked about what is it about pretense, right? And I will bridge it with bullshit jobs. So the pretense is one word for it. There is another more benevolent quote from David is that humans by collective investment can create a god on a spot, right? So what happens is the pretense can be seen as less like pretense is a little bit childish term, right? But you might as well use adult term, the collective investment. Does the same thing, really. The similarity is, well, for Africans, it would be you take some drink and you mix, like sometimes they've been creating fetishes by drinking stuff, right? You mix something in the water, you drink it with another person, and you tell a story that we are now subject to some power that will punish us, that will turn our intestines inside out if we do not adhere to the terms of a deal that we are making with each other. The oath that you give is a necessary during this part of creation of the fetish. The oath that you give and the punishment, the suffering that you stipulate as a just recourse to the just punishment that you should receive if you break it is a part, like is a necessary part how Africans did it. In other examples, in more modern examples, when people swear an oath of loyalty to, like a military swear an oath of loyalty to the banner of the unit, the example from the last time, any kind of giving an oath has this potential, if giver of an oath is genuine, has this potential to invest an object with the sense of having power of the person who performed such action, and maybe in the people who actually participate and who actually do give an oath, they are not mistaken, strictly speaking. They are here present, they are the ones giving an oath, and they're in full knowledge that it is by giving oath that the power, that the object acquires power over them. It is later possible that that other people start emulating them, and that constitutive moment of a person giving an oath gets effaced. But it is a mechanism of how collective pretense or collective investment allows us to create this, imbue the object with subjectivity and with a power over us. My example that I've given from the last time is improv theater, and when during a training people clap in turn, it creates it is easy to create an illusion that there is a supernatural invisible entity flying around and making us clap, right? We all know, we all here are pretending, but we also can pretend that it is true. And for a new person coming into our relationship, it might as well be true, because it is existing social institution and just works like that. And the way David uses this insight in a bullshit job, when he talks about spiritual violence, he talks, for example, about Derek, whose job is to sell party supplies, which Derek despises, not actually evil in any case. Are there the things which allows people to have silly fun, and silly fun is a good thing, right? It's about human relationships. But because Derek is caught up in this fantasy of other people, that when other people pretend to have fun, and other people pretend that these things are important, it basically allows them to maintain social relationships. But Derek, who caught up in these relationships, and it is not his fetish, he does not share this fantasy, and he experiences it as a misery of false pretense. When people are happy to pretend, they pretend, they create a new reality when they pretend together. When you are drawn through the violence, drawn into a relationship of pretense, you experience this misery of false pretense. And much of bullshit job and the false pretense of being busy is first of all, we have fetish of being busy. Some people really value this fetish. That is, it embodies human actions which reproduce social institution of wage labor and economy ultimately. Other people who found themselves drawn into these relationships through the violence experience it as a false pretense, and that we can detect it through the misery that they explain to us. Another example comes from his parallel that he draws from with BDSM community and sadomasochistic dynamic of corporations. When Annie, who works at some medical company, she makes a mistake first week of employment, and then through her the continuation of her employment, the boss uses this original mistake to constantly humiliate her. Like, why does boss do so, right? There is no reason, like, to assume that boss basically forgot that he already that she corrected her mistake, and he can, boss is she in this context, continues to evoke this dynamic, which is exactly similar to dynamic people practice and actually derive some fun from in BDSM community. But in here we find a person who drawn into this dynamic through relationship of violence. She cannot basically give up this relationship. She does not negotiate it, and she has to pretend that this relationship is real. Basically, for her, this relationship actually do become real. It is this act when violence makes origin of the relationship effaced, and a relationship is seen as eternal. So you come into corporation, and your job is to be a humiliation puppet for your boss. That is different from play acting. From what is missing is actually ability to negotiate this relationship and exit this relationship safely. The difference between pretense and the forced pretense. So this was my attempt to answer Patricia's and Gerald's question. Now, John, how that turns into economy, right? David in other places says that his original interest in Roy Baskar was that Roy takes up on the problem of the new. How does anything socially new happen at all? And because philosophical language for the constitution of the new, the philosophical language that we inherit from the Western tradition, is that of a synthesis, that like two forces of a conflict come together and through brilliant synthesis create something new. Where does new come from, right? Roy Baskar looks at it from philosophical point of view, and that informs David's ability to, because David is interested in the same question: how does any social newness like gets constituted in the first place? In the situation specifically about economy, the value book shows that the continuation, the continuity between social relationships of other tribes and our modern economy, in a very like provocative sense, he shows like how the speech of the chief in of my head, I forgot. I forgot the community that he refers to. Kayapo, the chief in Kayapo community giving a speech, and that speech, the act of giving a speech, is exactly symbolically exactly corresponds to the function of money, which is medium of exchange. The speech of a chief is a medium of exchange, and the power of the store of value that money have. The store of value, the original economists didn't bring attention to it. It was Marx's. At least David says that it was Marx shows that in David's works that money have have function of store of value. They become value in themselves exactly when they transition from being a symbol of value to becoming a source of value, when it becomes possible to force people to work by promising them money. And that is only done through violence, through forcibly putting people into factories and forcing them to do basically alienated labor, or what we could call a bullshit jobs, something that humans could not. The necessary part here is that humans could not be allowed to derive satisfaction from whatever they do, from the activity itself, and therefore they must imagine that whatever they get as a reward for this activity is what they wanted in the first place, the money, right? But you could reverse engineer it back into societies where market isn't present or doesn't have the same role as in our society, and there you would have the store of value. Like if you don't have a way if you don't have a writing and you don't have a way to preserve food, you bring up a deer and you want to store a deer. If you don't have a fridge, the deer would just rot if you try to preserve it. Well, the way you store a deer, you give it away, and you have a public performance associated with giving away the deer. In this way, you store the value of you bringing the deer into other people, right? And money in our culture is just taking on this function of storing of value. Instead of storing value in the other people through the performance, we're storing value in the money by performance of doing stupid, alienated, miserable labor, and it must be stupid, alienated, and miserable for money to have this power. At least enough people must experience it as miserable for other people to have enough ways to spend their money. For money to generally have this power in society, enough people must experience their condition as miserable. We're running out for time, Patricia.
Oh, I see that we're running out of time. And I just wanted to plug in again this whole idea of the value in terms of economics. And I think that in the book, again, that I'm reading, the rationale self-interest calculation that Mauss puts forward seems like a good place to like investigate more if we cannot talk philosophically, about what David is giving us as an alternative to money, because in this where Mauss explains, and maybe this is how Graeber is interpreting Mauss, and then I'm trying to interpret it myself, is that it's in page 257. It's this whole idea that the importance of work is really around not the tracking of the exchange in terms of money, but really the human nature of the exchange. And I leave it at that because we don't have a lot of time to discuss it, but I think that something resonated with me. I just wanted to give it a little U-turn, take it back from Baskar and put it back into like Mauss, which I think is what Graeber was intending in this book. And I might be wrong, but I do appreciate Baskar though.
Mauss's whole project is to challenge the narrative of social contract. He finds that the only way we could negotiate, the only fantasy that we have to explain to each other anything socially new is a fantasy of social contract. In times of Mauss, the times of Mauss inherits basically Hobbes and Rousseau and all that stuff, right? So any new institution happens by two people agreeing to respect selfish interest and so on. Well, Mauss entire project is to flip it on its head by saying that no, original contract, original human contract is actually communism. That is, what people agree on in original contract is not to fully alienate, each member fully alienates himself towards community, reserving nothing for himself, and thus becomes equal in his ability to wield the power of community. That is me roughly quoting Rousseau, right? And Mauss says, no, original contract is actually two people, not entire community, coming together and entering into relationship of total prestation. Total prestation is answering to any need of another with all your abilities, and like a full alienation yourself towards one person. And then the relationship between two can become relationship between more people. Like it becomes, you can extend the contract between two to contract between many, but it can never be contract between everyone. Or like in Mauss, it probably can. Mauss is still trying to, like, he is very socialist, and he's trying to save this communism by saying that basically it is in our nature to feel obligation to return a gift. This is core argument of Mauss, that he tries to prove with all his work on gift that it isn't like our nature is not to look for self-interest. Our nature is to feel this internal obligation to return what was given, and because we've been given so much from other people, we are always feeling obligated to return. This is his entire project, and David challenges it, saying, "Well, no, that isn't true. That the Mauss's examples are basically wrong, but they are wrong to a degree. You can still salvage, like this is particular David's almost surprising ability that taught me a lot. He can read authors who he finds who he disagrees with, and even disagrees violently. This power of generous reading, of reading on a term of the writer, and salvaging whatever insights it is possible to salvage, even if you cannot embrace the whole cosmology of the author. So he salvages a lot from Marx, he salvages a lot from Mauss, and reconstitutes this entire body of knowledge in a different shape. So, do we want to keep answering questions? Do people need to go?
I think we should try to stick to 1 hour. So that was the rule from the beginning. But anybody can, we can continue email exchange, for example. But if you can tell us about the next time, that will be very valuable.
Right. So I thought about doing next time. Well, I think I finally landed. I want to do next session about turning modes of production inside out. This is a David's essay where he takes up on more specifically on Marxist project. It is less subversive than consumption essay, but well, I decided it is easier to illustrate this discussion. It is easier to connect to, like, I see people start looking into theory of value, and for people who go ahead and actually look into the book, the turning modes of production inside out would be better illustration for.
Can you post the essay that you, or the articles And is it easier to find? I'm very bad at finding things in the.
Oh,
I think we should start also, we should start also to send the text through the people who register to the reading group, because we have email addresses, so we can post it. We also had a reading group about modes of production inside out. I don't remember who ran it. It was in the first year of Museum of Care, so we can look into that, because that's a time when we will put in video online. So it is online in the Museum of Care YouTube. I can look, I can find it and also send everyone. And over, Stas, you can take a look at that first.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Really, thank you.
yeah. Also, David has a good public appearance where he discusses, I think, together with David Vengro, the topics of turning modes of production inside out. So that would be well illustrated thing, but it is still good for us to go over it again as a spring to other topics about value and about consumption.
Stas, your summary at the beginning was so helpful for me. I don't know if you were reading something, if you would be able to share that, that would be really helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, come on to the next session in a month. Okay, is that it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stas. And thank you, everyone. Really helpful. True. So we can send now the emails to everyone who was registered with the new text. And Stas, if you can give us any information to share, that will be great. Quotes,
Yeah,
whatever you
I'll try to
whatever you want to share.
on a weekend.
Okay, thank
Not
you.
immediately.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great discussion. Thank you so much for everything.
Bye-bye.